Fox 5 continuing coverage tonight of the plan to develop the site of an old mine into thousands of new homes near Lake Las Vegas. This is drone video of the Three Kids mine, which was operational from 1917 to 1961. That land now contaminated with arsenic, lead, and manganese. Tonight, Lake Las Vegas neighbors came together at the Henderson City Council meeting. They say they want their voices to be heard and answers about how the land will be cleaned up and then turned into housing.
We're not opposed to the development. What we want to do is to see that it's done as safe as possible.
Haya Hendrick is the founder of a group calling themselves East Henderson Public Health and Welfare Committee.
Our objective is to ensure the safest plans and methods are used to protect the collective health of residents.
Formed just over 3 weeks ago, more than 100 members met over the weekend to go over the latest with the Three Kids mine site project that many are just learning about.
There are certain questions that haven't been fully answered, and this process has moved along very quickly without the general public, especially the folks in the neighborhood, being informed this process was moving along.
What I'm going to ask is that the city consider having our group play an active role with the developer.
Concerned neighbors also say they want to be informed of the decisions made by the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection when it comes to the cleanup and the city of Henderson on redevelopment of the site.
The concern we have as a community group is we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't.
Hendrick believes the toxic site needs to be cleaned up, but worries doing so, disturbing the soil, brings up a whole new set of challenges.
I don't know if the studies have really clarified how much dust will be moving out from the immediate area of the development into the surrounding neighborhoods.
The mine site is currently owned by private developers and the federal government. That federal land is slated to be transferred to the city of Henderson so it can be sold to developers, but that has yet to happen.
There is a memorandum of agreement in place that outlines what could be possible, but it has to be formalized in another agreement.
Though the city of Henderson does not yet own the land, Henderson Mayor Michelle Romero still addressed the group's concerns about being heard in the process.
The city is willing to reach out to NDEP to request that they come out. They've been out numerous times to answer some of these questions. I recognize that you all didn't get the opportunity. We can request those meetings.
And the city of Henderson clarified they have no role when it comes to cleanup methods or decisions. That is up to the federal government and the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. Fox 5 met last week with NDEP to go over the plans at the site, and you can find that full report on the homepage of our website, fox5vegas.com.